Hey everyone, Roy Rogers from The White Book and the Second Sons, back again with another one of my How in the Wild videos. It's been a little bit, but this one has been in the cooker for a good while. Today's episode, we're going to look at three of the most important concepts in playing and understanding games of Game of Thrones, the card game. That's, of course, the concepts of card advantage, tempo, and action advantage. Anyone who comes from another card game background, Magic, Hearthstone, Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess probably Card Advantage exists in whatever that Valve game is that's escaping me right now, Artifact. Uh, and same with tempo. But action advantage, while present in games like Magic, is a little different in Thrones, and we'll get into what I mean by that. And it's actually probably more important in Thrones than it is in other games. So the way this video is going to go, I'm going to lay out what I mean when I say tempo, what I mean when I say card advantage, when I'm saying action advantage, and then I'm going to give specific examples of cards that are card advantage cards, cards that are tempo cards, and cards that are action advantage cards to sort of give you a sense of what they are and how they would work in practice. So the point of this video is to get you to better understand Thrones in a theoretical way and to give us a shared language to discuss things when evaluating cards. Because one of one of the problems in Thrones is, at least when I came in, because I didn't come in with a very strong card background. Like the last time I had played Magic was in middle school. It took me a long time to sort of pick this up. Sort of offhandedly through conversations with better players. There was not really any resources to sort of figure out when someone on the white, when Will or Kyle or God help you Glazer said on the white book card advantage. I was like, I'm not entirely sure what card advantage is, and I would have to puzzle it up or look at Magic articles. And I wanted to sort of look at what it means, these concepts in Thrones, particularly the concept of tempo, which is thrown around a lot in discussions of Thrones and how it works. And so hopefully this will sort of give people a sort of a base for understanding so that we can begin discussions. Obviously, not everyone is going to agree with me and sort of how I lay out these concepts and how I explain them. And I welcome, of course, people debating that and trying to come up with their own definitions of it. But I think sort of having a good starting place that we can point people to who are getting into the game or looking to refine their game and take it to the next level is really useful. So that said, let's jump right in. So card advantage is the big umbrella for all three of these. And this is basically saying that you have more resources than your opponent. And fundamentally in card games, the fundamental resource across all card games is cards. Do you have more cards than your opponent? And that's the goal that you try to do. Whether you're playing Magic, whether you're playing Gwent on Witcher 3, or you're playing Thrones, having more cards than your opponent is key. Now, it's not just cards in hand, although we'll get specifically about the relationship between cards in your hand and card advantage in a minute, but it's cards at command, which you can see on my little list of all three of those. How do you have more overall cards than your opponent? So if you have 5 cards in hand, 3 locations, and 4 characters, while your opponent has 6 cards in hand, but 1 character and 1 location, you have more card advantage than they do. And you can leverage them into the other 2 concepts that we're talking about, tempo and action advantage. But of course, that's the broadest definition of card advantage. Do you have more cards than your opponent? Do you have access to more cards? So things like draw is, of course, a form of card advantage because you draw a card and your opponent doesn't draw a card. You are gaining card advantage. It's not just that, though. It's also the best way to put this would be card advantage by breaking it into tempo and action advantage. It's important to also think about cards in your hand, right? Because what you need to do is you need to find ways to leverage your card advantage into the other 2 forms of sort of action in Thrones, tempo and action advantage that I'll define in a second. So it is oftentimes when people don't mean necessarily, when they say card advantage, they don't necessarily just mean cards at command, right? They are actually thinking about the raw resources, which is, of course, cards in your hand. So this is why in first edition frequently the saying was draw equals win. If you can draw more cards than your opponent, you can win. Because you can turn those raw cards into tempo, you can turn them into action advantage and win the game. Now that's of course not necessarily true in second edition, which we'll get to in a second once we kind of understand what tempo is. But I think it's important to sort of in this video, I'm going to be talking about card advantage largely in its second meaning, which is, of course, that it's the cards in hand, the sort of raw material that you have in the form of cards, versus the general cards at command. Because I think it's useful to sort of think about turning raw cards into board presence, into actions on the board, for the purposes of this video. So let's start defining the other two concepts, tempo and action advantage. So tempo is basically who can do what. Who is ahead on the board, who is behind on the board, and who is capable of doing things on the board. So tempo plays are things that are designed to make it so you can do more on the board and your opponent can do less. And this is often trying to trade up. All right. And what separates card advantage from tempo rawly is card advantage is all about purely cards. I have 12 cards at command, 3 locations, 3 characters, and the rest cards in my hand. And then my opponent has only 2 cards in hand and 2 cards on the board. I have more card advantage, right? But tempo takes into consideration gold, because it's about turning the raw cards I have in my hand, right here, into presence on the board. So that takes into play gold. So oftentimes, if you're seeking card advantage, you want to trade 2 for 1. So you want to go, I play 1 card, I take care of 2 of your cards. Or trade 1 for 1 to maintain your advantage, to prevent your opponent from doing something. Tempo plays, on the other hand, take gold advantage. So it's an equal in raw card advantage. Putting to the torch any location is the same thing, right? So I trade one of my cards, a put to the torch from my hand, for one of your opponent's cards, a location in the board. But in the tempo sense, putting to the torch a 1 gold location is not as big as a tempo play as a 3 or 4 gold location. All right, so tempo is how you turn your raw card advantage into presence on the board using other resources such as gold. And so it's important to understand that tempo is about turning cards into game actions. And that brings us to the third thing, which is action advantage. And action advantage is how often can you do things. Because what separates Thrones fundamentally from many other card games is instead of just having 1 or 2 combat phases, so in the case of Magic, I attack my opponent decides to block or not, and then it goes over to their turn, they decide to attack, and I decide whether to block or not, and we just repeat that. So for each player, there's 1 combat phase, 2 per sort of like back and forth cycle. Thrones, there are up to 6 per round. And unlike games like Magic, and games like Hearthstone, you have to tap out, you have to kneel defenders, which of course limits your options. So if I want to defend, I can't attack you back, right? Or if I am going to attack, I can't then defend. So the fact that, if you're going second, in order to stop your opponent from doing what you want them to do through defense, you have to tap out, you have to kneel out, is really a big action advantage, right? Because that limits your ability. Unlike, say, again, let's go to Magic, where if I defend and then it goes back to my turn, I can then attack you with that same character or creature in the case of Magic that I used to defend. So that's a big difference, right? Because the combination of that there's up to 6 combats, and each one is of course gated by military, intrigue, and power icons. So not all characters are created equal. More icons is better in forms of action advantage. It's really, really important that you can turn single cards into multiple actions. So cards like, of course, Jaime Lannister, who can attack with military and then either attack intrigue or defend a challenge because he doesn't kneel to attack in military challenges, is really important. Or, of course, Randall Tarley's ability to stand multiple times, right? And we'll get to these things in a second. So action advantage is not just who can do what. Tempo is about who can do what. So how much more raw ability and board control does each player have? Action advantage is how much can specific cards do. And the key thing about Thrones is finding ways to turn single cards into multiple forms of action, right? And that's, of course, through stand most frequently, but it can be other other tricks. So, uh, both action advantage and tempo are forms of card advantage in the broadest sense. But I think it's important, again, to go back to it, to sort of continue to break them out. So card advantage, the way I'm going to use it for the rest of the video, is thinking about raw cards in hand, raw just cards at command that you have. Tempo is how you leverage those cards at command into actions on the board. And then action advantage is how frequently you take those actions. And I think this will become clear when we move specifically into cards. So let's look at the first one that we want to do, which is counting coppers. All right, so counting coppers is my example of a card advantage card. So the way in which in Thrones, raw card advantage, drawing cards, is often balanced about tempo. Right? So counting coppers, you draw 3 cards. So that means in a round, bare minimum, you're going to see 5 cards, and your opponent is only going to see 2. And that's a huge advantage. But of course, you pay a price for this form of raw card advantage in the form of a tempo loss, right? Because tempo, again, as I said earlier, cares about gold. So while card advantage is about raw cards, tempo is about converting those cards through gold through into plays on the board. So theoretically, counting coppers gives you card advantage, but is a tempo hit. 2 gold on a plot is not a lot. Now, of course, later in the game, once you've built up tempo in the form of limited locations, you can expand this and more frequently use your card advantage to turn into tempo. Now, one of the more interesting things about counting coppers is, I think, it sort of shows you in second edition how there's not a direct one-to-one relationship like there was necessarily in first edition between tempo and card advantage, because early on in the world, counting coppers was a big tempo hit before economy became more stable over the course of cycle 3 and cycle 4. If you talk about the first year of the game, counting coppers was not a great card. It was played because you needed some form of raw card advantage in all your decks, and the ability to find card advantage in the draw deck was not really present for a lot of factions. But counting coppers was a legit risk, right? And if you remember up to from Aaron Glazer's sort of win at Red Saturday in 2016 with Joe Mirando's win in Worlds, this was the reign of tempo, where raw card advantage didn't really matter as much as your ability to maintain tempo. And this will become clearer when we look at what I think is the biggest tempo card. And the biggest tempo card, and the clearest tempo card, I guess you could say, would be Pinch of Powder. Right? Pinch of Powder is all about tempo. All right, so you win a challenge, an intrigue or a power challenge by 5. You return your opponent's card to their hand. Now, this is not really a form of card advantage because there's no trading, right? Like Put to the Sword is more obviously a tempo play and a form of card advantage, right? Put to the Sword, you pay 2 gold, and it's a great tempo play because frequently you're not putting to the sword 1 gold characters or even 2 gold characters, 3 or higher. So you get both the form of some of card advantage because you win a military challenge by 5. And you get a 2-for-1, really. Although the card itself doesn't give you a 2-for-1, the game mechanic gives you a 2-for-1. So you win the military challenge. You put their 7-cost Jon Snow to the sword. He dies, and then your opponent has to kill an additional character for claim. Of course, that leads to a 2-for-1 and card advantage. And, of course, tempo, because you, of course, traded up. You paid 2 gold and 1 card for your opponent's card, which was, of course, in the case of Jon Snow, 7 gold, but 5 gold. Anything 3 or higher, you have traded up in tempo. 1 gold, and the same is true with, it's even more true with, what is the name of the card? Tears of Lys, there we go. Tears of Lys, which, of course, also has a form of card advantage. You kill one of their characters for only 1 gold, so almost any character in the game besides the 1-drops reducers you get a tempo advantage, And of course, you get a card out of their hand and you kill a character. So you paid 1 card to get 2 cards out of theirs, one off the board and one there. But pinch isn't like that. Pinch makes it clear of like the importance of tempo, the power of tempo, because it doesn't actually get rid of the card. The card's still in your opponent's hand. I mean, obviously in Thrones with intrigue challenges and things like that, you can then do it. But particularly if you win it on the intrigue challenge. But if you win on the power challenge, which I actually more frequently see people win this see people win because it's not frequently Greyjoy that you see pinch. But anyway, that's not here or there. Pinch doesn't get rid of the card. It goes to their hand. But then they have to next turn pay the gold again. So even though they haven't lost a card, they've lost the gold investment that they sunk in that card. And of course, what makes pinch so powerful, it's nominally a 3 gold removal card. 2 gold to put it in shadows, 1 gold to bring it out of shadows. But what makes the pinch raider interaction is, of course, it's free. And that just makes it such a massive power move. And it can trade up with literally any character in the game. And you gain some kind of tempo advantage because you're not paying. If you have Raider in play, you're paying 2 for the Raider, and you get any character that when you win a challenge by 5 or non-military challenge by 5. But again, thinking about pinch and its power level, and why sometimes for newer players, like cards like pinch don't really come off as that great because it doesn't permanently get rid of it. This was like a huge moment for me when I think cards like Pinch of Powder became obviously good. Like Put to the Sword or similar effects are splashy and obviously good. Pinch, on the other hand, is not necessarily, because again, you returning to your hand, well, they can just play it next turn. Well, the fact that they have to play it next turn is the power of it because it's such a huge tempo loss. The ability, again, to return a 7-cost Jon Snow to your opponent's hand, they paid 7 gold, or 5 gold if they have a Great Hall or something. That's still a huge gold advantage. Having to pay that turn after turn after turn is really, really strong. And of course, what makes Pinch extra busted is as a non-terminal attachment, it doesn't go away. So unlike, say, Ward, which trades 1 for 1 and then goes away, this doesn't do it. So Pinch is sort of the ultimate tempo card. Next, let's take a look at 2 cards, actually, that I think give you a good sense of what action advantage is. What I mean it. Now, let's start with this most simple and straightforward one, and that is, of course, Plaza of Pride. Now, Plaza of Pride is, of course, action advantage because you are taking a single card, whatever card you're standing, and allowing you to use it twice. All right, which is really powerful. Anyone who's played against Targaryen knows that since this is the Night's Watch box, since the Night's Watch box, that this is a busted card. It's very powerful. 2 Khal Drogos, 2 7-cost Dannys, 2 Quothos just coming at you each turn. These, particularly Khal Drogo with his renown and 2 military challenges, it's just really powerful. And it's the ability to turn a single card into multiple actions. So that's the action advantage. You are, through Plaza of Pride, turning one of your characters into multiple forms. Now, what the other reason why it's ideal is the way in which, so if Counting Coppers, over there, right, over there, Counting Coppers, nope, yes, Counting Coppers, is balanced around, it's a loss of tempo, right? To get raw card advantage, right? Action advantage is usually balanced around losing card advantage to gain tempo. So look at Plaza of Pride. You discard a card from your hand to stand a card. So you are down a card and up an action, which, in raw card advantage terms is a loss. But of course, because the action advantage outweighs that, and the way in which you can turn that action advantage into tempo, into board control, right? That's the relationship here, right? Wyman is even more obviously this now because he's both more obvious and less obvious because you draw a card. He's neutral, but you're still sacrificing characters to power him. So you're in many ways losing tempo to gain action. So you're in many ways losing tempo in the form of a character on the board to gain more actions out of Wyman. and to, of course, draw a card. So while it's card neutral, it's not tempo neutral. So this is, again, showing the ways in which they try to balance this around you losing some other side of this sort of pyramid, with card advantage on the top and the two bottom things being action advantage and tempo. You lose from one point to gain usually an advantage in the other. In the form of card advantage, to gain card advantage, you frequently lose tempo. To gain action advantage, you usually gain, you either lose tempo or you lose card advantage. So that's the way in which the Thrones designers try to balance it. Now, that doesn't always work. Things like, of course, Marine has shown the ability that if you can pair action advantage with card advantage, you can overcome any sort of drawbacks. Wyman is very similar. If you can, using things like Flea Bottom to sort of maintain to make up for the tempo loss, you can get rid of the balancing factors, right? But of course, if there was no Flea Bottom, Wyman would be a somewhat weaker card. Plaza of Pride, obviously without Marine, is somewhat more, it's still pretty busted, but it's a somewhat more balanced card. And the same is true, of course, with Pinch of Powder and without Raider, right? Raider allows it to become tempo neutral because it doesn't cost you any gold. And Pinch of Powder, without the Raider interaction, this is a 3 gold removal attachment. And while still a very powerful tempo play, turning your 3 gold investment against your opponent's 6, 7, 8. Well, that's not really 8, but there's just that couple. But anyway, 5, 6, 7 is a huge deal. So what's important to understand here is that under this rubric of card advantage is these two other concepts, tempo and action advantage. And in many ways, second edition is more about tempo than card advantage and action advantage. Now, this waxes and wanes. I would say right now we're moving, thanks to factors like Sea of Blood, we're moving into a world where tempo is becoming more important. But we were just leaving an era where card advantage was more important. Like, look at the World's winning deck. Martel Wolf is a card that is all about trading short-term tempo loss for long-term card advantage victory. So it really is draw equals win. Like, look at what the opening plot was. The opening plot in the World's winning deck was, oh my god, what's it called? Why is my brain not working there on this card? Anyway, why is my brain not working? Anyway, it's the 3, 4, 1. You search the top 10 cards of your cards for each card type. And with only 3 gold, that's not a huge tempo play. Like, that's a big tempo hit, particularly in the first turn, because frequently Thrones is about, of course, setting up on the first turn, setting like the trying to be as like even as you possibly can on, or obviously everybody wants a tempo advantage, but trying to sort of be at parity with your opponent, and then over time try to gain tempo, transfer what card advantage you have into tempo or action advantage into tempo to win the game. But by opening exchange of information, there we go. By opening exchange of information, we get a big amount of card advantage. We draw a bunch of cards, which sets us up, but we lose a lot of tempo. Like, you definitely see, if you go back and you look at those games, there was definitely not, like, the first turn definitely took it on the chin and lost a lot of tempo. But over time, he sought to turn, the Martel Wolf players can seek to turn that loss of early tempo through card advantage into victory. Now, there are other decks, rush decks, which frequently try to gain a hold on the tempo of the game, use action advantage to maintain that tempo control, and smash you in the face and same with aggro decks, to try to do this. And you see this, like, for example, frequently in free folk decks, which seek to just grab hold of the tempo of the game and just not let it go. It doesn't matter. You will die with all. You can have all the raw card advantage in the world. You can even, have 5 locations and 6 cards in hand to my 3 characters and 1 limited location and no cards in hand, and I'll win because you just can't turn your card advantage into tempo because I seize the tempo so hard and put so much pressure on you with multiple 2-claim plots, right? And I used action advantage to do so as well. So that is the game is sort of moving from, I think, 2018 was a time in which card advantage was king. You saw this in the success of Tyrell decks. You saw this in the success of Martel Wolf, Martel Wars. Wars decks in general were definitely big card advantage decks towards more tempo oriented decks, thanks to Pinch of Powder's interaction with Raider, towards the ability of Sea of Blood to really disrupt your opponent's early tempo, the power of the 2-claim plots that Free Folk has gotten in the Greyjoy box. Like, the Greyjoy box is a big tempo box. So while I think 2018 was a year gradually, I think, of course, the ultimate card advantage deck is Combo. So we began the year with Combo as king. And gradually, we're going to be saying goodbye for 2018, moving into a year again with tempo. And this, of course, is not the first time. The first year of the game was definitely ruled by tempo decks, and we're probably returning back into this. So if you're interested in sort of how these concepts are applied specifically in archetypes, I would like you guys to take a look at decks. I'd like you all to take a look specifically at the previous video I did. Now that this series is on the White Book channel, you can take a look at my video on deck archetypes, control, mid-range, rush. That sort of will be the next level for this. So that sort of we'll talk about how specific general archetypes take advantage of these 3 concepts of card advantage, tempo, and action advantage. So hopefully this can provide a sort of a starter and a primer for you if you're a newer player or a player trying to level up their game. And my next couple of videos on this channel are going to be, again, specifically looking at where the 2018 meta, the 2019, late 2018, early 2019 meta is starting to shape up. We just got a big box, and the thing is, boxes change metas way more than cycles do, because they're a big influx of cards. So we've got a bunch of changes. The game is actually, I think, in a completely different place than it was come Worlds. So I'm excited to sort of dig into the Sea of Blood meta and provide some analysis of some decks once we start seeing what's doing well and what's not doing, and what's doing less well. I guess that's a good way to put it. But so if you're interested in that, come back. We expect back to some deck tech episodes now that I've done these kind of like basic level up videos, and hopefully you enjoy this. If you've got to give me a hard time about my way of laying this out, feel free to do so there. Or if you would like praise, I love praise. You can also leave that down in the comments of YouTube. Make sure you, of course, you check out the White Book every week on Fridays, and Second Sons every other Tuesday live on Twitch. So please have a happy new year, and good luck Thronesing.